thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Tech and Culture Speaker Series. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm the Economic Inclusion Fellow at Center State CEO, and I also will be moderating tonight's event. Before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to JP Chase for sponsoring this event and sponsoring a lot of the work that we do around tech and culture. Well, yeah, basically sponsoring a lot of the work that we do around tech and culture and trying to diversify the tech industry through workforce development, community engagement efforts, and also being able to bring in, robust speakers like Cassandra to be able to talk about their experience within tech. So yeah, again, thank you, JP Chase, for sponsoring these events and sponsoring a lot of our events moving forward. Cassandra Dell is a graduate of Syracuse University with a BS and an MS in Bioengineering. Previously held positions include sales, accounting manager, senior vertical market analyst, and senior pricing analyst. She has been recently promoted to regional pricing lead for Eaton's Crouse Hinds business, where her responsibilities include ensuring the completion of pricing requests, driving price realization in the Gulf States regions, and working with district managers and regional vice president to drive key project initiatives. And I'm sure we'll get more into exactly what Cassandra is doing a little bit later in the event. So Cassandra, would you like to say anything before we get started? Okay, so the first question I have, Cassandra, is can you just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
Okay, yes. As Marcus mentioned, my name is Cassandra Dell. I am from Long Island, New York. I was actually born in Brooklyn, but spent most of my life in Long Island, New York. I am first generation Haitian American, and it's really defined my upbringing and core values in becoming really the person and adult that I am. I think my parents, being immigrants, spent a lot of time working and trying to build a foundation in the States. And that's something that I quickly caught on to it, even at a young age. I remember, being in elementary school and, having conversations with my mother or dad or saying like, keep the door closed, right? Because they've had to work multiple shifts and being a, latchkey young child, really having to sort of manage and play older part of a sister, and understanding that things did not necessarily come easy, but they were really willing to do the work to have it so that myself and my sister had a better opportunity in the States. I am also a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. That is historically a Black organization. We were founded in Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana, in 1922. And so I've spent a lot of time, and I'll speak on that probably as we move forward, in my collegiate career, really fostering relationships and really learning my public speaking skills and learning how to be a leader through that organization. Outside of those particular roles of myself, I am a mother, I am a wife, and I am a foodie. So anything that involves delicious foods, I'm there and ready to receive it. And I also enjoy spending time with family, and really, I really consider myself like a beauty enthusiast. So learning holistic and natural ways to sustain a healthy lifestyle is something that's really been up my alley. So that's a little bit about me.
Very interesting. Cassandra, can you tell us a little bit about your experience at Syracuse University?
So coming to Syracuse University and living in what we call downstate New York, when I came to upstate New York, I legitimately told myself like, this is not upstate New York, because the culture was completely different. The layout, really the demographics of the city were very different, even being from Long Island, which I think people also associate with being very white, but or being primarily Caucasian. But I grew up in this town of Freeport, New York, and really had the opportunity to be around very diverse groups of people throughout my, not undergraduate, but my elementary studies and even in high school. And then transitioning as a student in Syracuse University, I quickly felt my Blackness, if that makes any sense. I recognized that I was one of three African American people, students in the College of Bioengineering. And so, sitting in that experience, I felt the need. I felt like I could not mess up, right? Because the eyes were always on the outliers in the classroom. But also, I was actually excited to move away from home and build that independence and learn to sort of self-sustain myself, because it's an experience I was yearning for when transitioning out of the high school and being with your parents. And really, a lot of my friends stayed local, but I made the decision that I would go to SU and stay there and really learn to become myself.
Relax.
If you will. And in terms of, course life, social life, I felt the need to balance my coursework with social life. It wasn't easy, I'll say that. But I felt like social life gave me a bit of a reprieve, because being an engineering student, it's very course loaded, very taxing. So there were a few other professions where they would have 14, 15 credits. And I found myself, looking for space in my schedule, because it was jam packed with 18, 5, 6 courses throughout the course of a semester. And I had made a vow to myself. I said, I'm staying here for 4 years, because there's some financial implications if I stay any longer. So really having to be, work backwards in a way. I felt that even at a young age, and being 18, I was like, all right, you have T minus 22, 18 to 22, to really get all of this coursework and absorb what this university has to offer. So in short, I felt like it was, it inspired me to become my own self. I learned and networked with a lot of people. I love to socialize. So whether it be, a party and supporting other organizations in the Shine Student Center, or, road tripping with friends, I think that all those elements really make up who you are. And it's important to balance the two. So all in all, I think it was a great experience, and I'm proud that I went there.
For sure. You hit on a key point, and I'm sure there's a lot of students that go through this. But can you explain a little bit exactly how you felt being like one of the only Black individuals within that specific school?
So I will say, imposter syndrome comes into play very quickly. You ask yourself, that you got into the university and someone looked at your application and said yes, but you're looking at your constituents, you're looking at your counterparts and saying, where do they come from? Or are their mothers and doctors engineers? Or, oh yeah, I hear their mom is a surgeon. So you're hearing I heard a lot of my peers, I saw that their parents had experience in the professions that they were in. And so oftentimes, there's no engineer that I know directly in my family. So I felt the need to, like, girl, you need to buckle up, right? Because there's really, as much as there's support with friends, you are an individual contributor, and you need to be able to perform in some capacity to make it to the next semester. So while, I didn't let it isolate me from the greater group, I made sure that I tried to leverage some relationships where I could. But I find that when you see yourself in people, you tend to just gravitate towards people who look like you. So it was me and 2 other women, which I was fortunate enough of knowing. And every time class ended, we felt like our minds were bamboozled by the lesson plan that we had. But, we made a plan that we were all going to find a way to, scrabble and scribble and find a way to make it through the semesters piece by piece. So in short, I felt like, the professors are never going to outwardly say, oh yeah, you're one of many, you're one of 3 no one's outwardly going to say that out loud to you. But I felt it, and I think I found a space, fortunately, where I could speak, our concerns, or feeling like, the bell curve is, I don't know, let's say most of the class got a 60%. A 60% would quickly turn into an A in an engineering course because that's how aggressive the pace of learning was. So in short, I know I said a lot there. I think it was important that I found a group of people that could help me drive my way through this program, because doing it alone makes it that much more difficult. Yeah.
So you kind of hit on it, but what was it like studying bioengineering? Because I hear that and that sounds extremely intimidating coming into college. So just want to know a little bit about your experience.
So in bioengineering, I don't like to play elitist, but I felt like in the engineering program, it was like, oh, you have your civil engineers, and you've got your mechanical, your electrical. Bioengineering, they knew that we took all the sciences. We were responsible for taking biology, chemistry, physics, electrical engineering. We touched on all aspects of the sciences, and that's what made it a bit intimidating in myself. I know that from my culture, being in medicine is always pushed, but I never quite felt like I wanted to take the path of a doctor. And so having a love for the sciences and wanting to understand the body, I landed there, and it's almost like, what did I just do? When you signed up for it, like you take the first, you sign up for all your classes and you're seeing all these textbooks and you're asking yourself, okay, there's only 24 hours in the day. How am I going to cover all of this? It's intimidating. It was absolutely intimidating. I went from being this really, really high performer in high school, and I understood that the transition was hard for me. And I want to make sure I make that so clear to the audience, because sometimes you're so used to doing well in one space and then you transition to another and it hits you, right? And you're asking yourself very quickly, like, should I be here? How am I going to sustain it? There's also some financial implications if I don't pass. But I became very much a hustler. Like those after hours with the professor, I was there. The extra assignment, I was there. Putting extra work in the other lab courses so that my GPA would sort of calibrate and keep me afloat was really where I dived in, where I think I excelled, because I know the material itself was extremely difficult. And I definitely don't want to sugarcoat that. It was hard.
Take my hat off to you. That's amazing. So upon graduation, and I'm referring to after you got your MS, what exactly did you go into, like occupation wise?
Yes. So after really being a student for 6 years, because I decided to pursue my master's after graduating very quickly. The job market was pretty difficult, and I felt like I needed a level of mastery that I didn't feel like I had with just my bachelor's degree. I told myself, what's next? I no longer wanted to be in a lab. I no longer wanted to sit in spaces that were very finite and intricate, because that's what being an engineer is in part in some professions, where in bioengineering specifically, it's very research oriented and the details matter, right? Because these are, essentially devices, products, services that you're providing for the body, the viability and livelihood of someone's life. So in that profession, I would spend hours in the lab. And after all that time, I said, okay, now that I know how to problem solve, I know how to work hard, and know how to work diligently, I want to be in a different realm. And so I made the executive decision to transition into corporate. And I actually had my first position in sales as an account manager. And that really was my first experience out of college. And it allowed me to really understand not just sales, but the different divisions and departments of a business. So while I was in sales, I understood sourcing, I understood marketing, I understood labor, what costs look like for, our branch managers. I understood what labor was and how do people balance sheets, accounts receivable, accounts payable. I was able to sort of in the 2.5 years time that I spent there, really get a feel for what makes up these large, Fortune 500 companies. What do the divisions and work look like? So I will say that first position gave me a lot more autonomy. Being a sales account manager, they really provide you with this. They provided me with this huge portfolio and said, "Hi, Cassandra, you can manage your time as the way you see fit. We just need these results to yield in 6 months' time, right?" So you were evaluated every quarter, every half year to assess how you were performing. So I think it wasn't a position I expected, but it certainly it was a big window in helping me understand how businesses function.
I see. I see that you were recently promoted. So I wanted to say congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But first, can you tell us a little bit about what Eaton's Crouse Hinds business is in general, just like an overview? And then I want to hear a little bit more about your specific role.
So Eaton's Crouse Hinds business is a international power management company, and we primarily service harsh and hazardous environments. So in short, what I want people to think is the oil and gas market. Think about any explosion-proof zones where we where we take out natural resources from the earth. So oil and gas, mining, power gen, those are spaces that we service, and we primarily provide harsh and technical devices that can withstand the extreme colds or extreme heat. So essentially to keep, the workers around those devices and areas safe. Another application is large sports stadiums. Those large LED lights that you're seeing, the large plugs and receptacles that you're seeing, for example, on George Washington Bridge. Eaton Crouse Hinds provides those products to sustain those locations.
I see. So what specifically is your role as regional pricing lead?
So as I've been in the role now for 3 months, and which I can't believe we're now transitioning into almost winter, but basically my responsibility in this regional pricing lead is to service the Gulf states of the United States of America. So we're talking Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Mississippi. And my focus is to make sure I work with the sales team alongside the product line managers, people who are listening to the voices of the customer, to make sure that we're providing the right products and the right material. And I'm responsible for making sure that all of our projects are within budget and product profit margin for our organization. So if someone has a large opportunity, we work with so many different organizations. We work with Amazon, we work with Tesla, we work with Chevron. We work with, hospital facilities, especially, around COVID, building short-term facilities to sustain people who are ill. We look to service those areas, and I'm responsible for making sure in a time where cost is really, really volatile, where labor is really short, where there's a delay in material, are we still meeting our profit margins as an organization? Are we making sure that we maximize our reach and our opportunity in the projects and product knowledge that we provide to our customers? So that it's a middle, I like to say middle woman, not middleman, middle woman profession, in that you're trying to take in the voice of multiple people and really making decisions solely based off, at the end of the day, numerical logistics. So
sounds like a very interesting job.
It's very interesting. It's complex because it's very hard to quantify who should have what price, especially as the markets change. So let's say, Marcus had this huge company and you were doing great in 2019. And then all of a sudden in 2020, you've lost some employees, you're having some cost issues. You can't purchase our products, but we still value your relationship and we want to make sure that you stay in business. It's been pretty difficult to make sure that you find that happy ground in the middle to make sure that you're meeting your customer requirements, providing them the things that they need, all while still making sure that you're okay and that our employers are still, profitable ultimately.
Right.
Yep.
Makes sense. So what skills that you developed studying bioengineering are transferable into what you're doing today? And it can be hard skills, soft skills, but I just want to hear a little bit about that because you said you were ready for a change upon graduation. So I kind of want to just key in on those skills that you still use.
One of the key skills I think was easily transferable from engineering to the role that I have now is problem solving. I have always had the affinity to understand something. So when someone says A is the answer, I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Like I need to know how what the legs and pieces, the nuts and bolts of the A, what led us to arrive to that answer. So I'm very technical in that sense. So when it comes to numbers and we have a success story to share, and someone says, hey, great, our margins were highly profitable. We've sustained this relationship for 2 years now. This is a new customer. I'm the person that goes back and says, well, how do we make that repeatable, right? Like, why are we winning? Because winning is not enough. So I think it allows me to tap into my technical skills and understanding what do we do? How do we make it repeatable so that we can apply the same winning strategy here somewhere else? So that takes a bit of problem solving. Another skill that I think really worked well is communication and public speaking. So as an engineering student, you're responsible for having several, group projects and even a thesis where you spend, 30 to 45 minutes being a subject matter expert and letting people feel confident in technical language, right? Whether they know what you're talking about or not. And I think that's something that I was able to leverage coming from a technical space. How do you make complex, intimidating work seem simple enough for someone to say, I'm on board with your plan? So communication has really been a focal point for my experience. And I think overall collaboration. While engineering can be a very independent experience, there are elements of it that are collaborative. So you're trying to leverage the strengths of any one person in a group or in a team. And that's another skill that I think I was able to transfer very quickly over to this role now.
Let's see. Kind of going back to make the comparison between what you're doing today and college. You talked a little bit about your experience as a Black woman in college. How has being a Black woman in, your professional life affected your experience?
That has been very interesting. I find that being a woman of color in my profession, so I'll talk about it from an internal standpoint and then an external standpoint. When you say the term like engineering, people are like, oh, like you're really smart, right? And again, I play a little bit in that imposter syndrome. I'm just like, I don't know who they're talking about, but thank you. Like, I appreciate the compliment. And it took me some time to really take ownership of my education and the rigor of getting through a program like that, and not having familial experience to help me when I initially pursued it. And then in transitioning to corporate, it was kind of like coming to SU. I felt alone again. I am the only woman of color right now on my team, only person of color on my team. And so I find myself, even as I start to, move up in different roles or transfer into departments, I'm still looking left and right, and there's not that many of me there. And so there is, I don't want to say a load, but I do feel a sense of responsibility to perform well so that I don't mess it up for the people that look like me that want an opportunity the way in where I am right now. I feel an obligation to perform well so that others can have the opportunity. I also feel an obligation to share my experience because it's not always, roses. It's not always pretty. You do feel alone. There is a bit of an emotional tax because you don't relate to some people sometimes culturally, right? I may want to talk about hair because that's a part of my, um, how I define myself, how I show up in the world. I choose to be a natural, natural hair woman in a
Mhm.
public space, and you don't see that often. So sometimes you do feel like the light shines on you, and while you are alone, sometimes I use it as an opportunity to really kind of just like sit my shoulders back and say, like, watch me work, right? Like, watch me flex. Like, I can do this too. So, um, even though it can feel isolating, even though there's an emotional tax, I know it's in the forward moving direction. And that's what keeps me going. Like, I have to, and every now and then I have to remind myself, like, it's okay to sit in your shoes. You belong here. You deserve to be
Mhm.
here. Like, they're promoting you for a reason. Don't second doubt it or ask why. Like, you deserve a seat at the table and make room for yourself.
Well said. I go through like a lot of these same thought processes. So like hearing you say stuff like that, it definitely is inspirational and makes me tell myself, okay, I do belong where I'm at. So I appreciate that, me personally. Um, so kind of to hit back on that, why do you think diversity is important in, multiple different fields, STEM, tech? Why is having individuals that look like each other, within these different industries and organizations?
So I think, I thought about this question. Diversity, there's first of all, there's multiple ways to that diversity shows up in the
Right.
workspace, right? It can be in work experience, personal experience, the way we look, you know, so the way we think, how we process things. I think diversity provides an opportunity to learn from someone that is not like you, right? Sometimes, while I love to believe that I have a lot of the answers, I don't have them all, right? And so when you have other, other people, different experiences and people, other variations of people in the room, it allows for learning, right? It allows you to be challenged in your own thoughts so that you can think differently. Now, sometimes it can be difficult because when you're not like-minded, you have to find a space to find that this the hum that allows you to work efficiently. But I think diversity allows for learning and growth. It challenges you. And number two, in terms of representation and diversity, I personally think it helps for morale and retention. When you see people that look like you, it makes that pursuit that much more real. It sustains you when you see people that look like you. I think it's so important when you look at the executive board of any organization, or you look at middle management. Are you seeing yourself there? Is there a window for me to get to where you are? I think as a woman of color, I'll be very transparent. It's so easy for us to be in social service spaces or at the lower end of the pyramid in a lot of these organizations, and we ask ourselves, when am I going to be the middle manager? When am I going to be promoted to senior product, ABC? And if organizations are not intentional about seeking out that opportunity, I think it's a really detriment to not just, the great talents that they're missing out on, but the growth that an organization tends to see. The population is evolving. And I think that the our organizations should show that. So I think and I think 2020 was a trying time for a lot of organizations where you know it, they were essentially forced to put D&I on the map and really start to dial in on their numbers. And I'll be interested to see how many organizations retain that flow, because I think it's important when people see themselves in the spaces that they work, it makes it that much more real for them. it sustains us. It really does. I think
Right.
representation is 100% important.
Well said. So what is something that you wish you knew earlier in your career or in your life?
I had to think about this one. So number one, it's okay if your career is not linear.
Mhm.
Being I guess, classified millennial, I come from a very traditional upbringing. So if you were not a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer and you didn't stay that course, people essentially looked at you. My family would look at me and say, like, well, now what? You didn't just cross over these oceans for
Right.
you to not know what you want to do. So I felt the obligation to really know what I was doing and stick the course, even if was difficult. But I understand now, especially as working from home, there's virtual spaces, graphic design. There's so many professions and opportunities for growth that are literally growing as we all, sit here and evolve in the professions that we're in. So it doesn't. In short, I feel like your career does not always have to be linear.
Mhm.
And even if you land somewhere that you didn't expect, you can still plant seeds and get something out of that experience. And I wanted, it took me some time to give myself grace in that. But now I think the older I get, you know, the degree is important, but what you do after the degree, the relationships that you foster, and the um, definition you give to yourself after you graduate is definitely important. Your career does not have to be linear. It's dynamic, it's ever flowing, and you can shift when you want to.
Amazing. So lastly, I wanted to ask, what words of advice would you have for someone that's looking to set off in a similar path as you?
I would say ask questions. Ask questions. I think sometimes it's so easy, especially right now, to look at social media and think that everyone's got it figured out. Like, oh, they're getting this promotion, or how are they getting promoted? How did they jump from here to B? How did they get the raise? Ask questions. I think it's important that we open up about how we achieve the things that we do. I oftentimes I feel like I've made assumptions in how things were done. I assume that, oh, maybe that person was smarter, or maybe they knew someone I didn't know. Leverage your relationships, ask questions, because you just never know where you might be, what might pique your interest. And what you study in undergrad at such a young age in your life does not have to be the thing you stick with. It's okay to change your mind and plant your seeds elsewhere. I really think that if I told myself, this is where you are now, it's not where you'll be, and allow yourself to evolve with passion and grace. Because I think I was probably my worst critic in all of this. So
Great advice. Good advice. So now I wanted to open up the floor for any questions that you may have for Cassandra based on her amazing presentation. You can drop the questions in the chat, or you can come off mute and ask her personally. It's up to you. If you drop them in the chat, though, I will read them off to her and she can answer.
Okay, so let me ask a question. So I just graduated last year, and I just started my job like recently, like 4 or 5 months ago. And I guess like some of the stuff you said, I kind of relate to, just being like the only Black woman in space with like people that don't look like you. So like, how do you, I guess, stand out, be noticed? How do you carry yourself? And how is the adjustment in just staying or being okay with being stagnant for a while and frustrated for a while, with staying maybe a little uncomfortable, a little stagnant in this role until you're taken seriously? Like, how do you manage or handle that, I guess, in the corporate space as a Black woman?
that is an excellent question. I find that, first of all, you need to know that you're there, and although you look different, you are more than deserving. So quickly trying to get past that is a whole complex within itself. But then finding your small niche. Sometimes your coworkers are not necessarily always your closest friends, but even if it's a small group of people that you can confide in, that you can trust in, I find that finding sponsors is important. So is there someone in the organization that has an experience, or is in a role that you want to be in? Let that be known very early, because if in fact you are, not uncomfortable, but you're not quite satisfied with the role that you're in, allow that to be known very early in your evaluation process when you're being assessed annually. So tell your manager, let's say you're in sales. I'd love to transition into marketing. I'd love to understand, the path to be a manager. I saw, Miss or Mr. Blank, or I've touched base with, and I'm just making names, Alyssa, Sherry, and I love the work that she does. Is there an extension project that I could do where I can learn a little bit more about that aspect of the business? Because if people don't know where you want to go, within 5 years' time, or even, I would argue even shorter, they will quickly place you where they feel like you need to be. So let your talents, let your interests be heard by someone, and then always try to find a small group, even if doesn't have to be buddy, but someone that you feel like you can confide in, that helps you sort of, really sustain yourself. I call it like a buddy system that helps you sustain yourself along the way. Like, I know for myself, it's one of my coworkers, just one, and we've become really good friends over time. And I find that the combination of those two things, letting my voice be heard and confiding in her when we can, really helps me to balance out that workspace dynamic.
Great question, Simone. Thank you, Cassandra. We have another question in the chat from Glenn Allen. How do you like working at a very large company?
So it's a good thing and bad thing. I know that my network is extremely large. So, and I'm talking international. So if I wanted to, travel or learn about an experience, it's a great opportunity to network with people who have had a plethora of experience. But oftentimes, and kind of tying into what Samoya said, it's very easy to get lost in that organization, because it's very easy for someone to make an assessment of your talents or where they want you to fall in the organization, and you get lost in that. You're like waiting for someone to sort of leave the opportunity, or, when is this person going to retire? So when you're in large organizations and you don't see a lot of openings, you're trying to make your voice and your foot known. And there are times where I did feel lost in that sort of, when am I going to get promoted? Does someone see my work? Does someone see my talents? But I started to trust in my voice and the contributions that I was making. I also, another thing I actually wanted to point out that I did not mention is I do a lot of work with our resource groups, where it fosters support and networking for people of color. So I'm in an organization, I actually co-lead the Syracuse, New York site called iConnect. And that is to leverage gaps, educate, network with any people of color, not just in the US, but internationally, so that we do feel that network of support. Because sometimes it's not in your local site. Sometimes they live in Pennsylvania, sometimes they're in California, sometimes they're in Dubai, but you still know you share a similar experience in being very few in the organization. And I put in a lot of work to make sure that we bring voice to the work that is needed in not only bringing in talents of people of color, but retaining them. And so I find that I've been able to sort of balance my sort of actual daily requirements with that area of, working towards a greater good. That also brings me some sort of balance in the workspace as well.
Thank you, Glenn. Great question. We have a question from Dane Dell. What/who were some of your inspirations growing up?
That's a good question. I think the first person that I can think of is actually my aunt, who is a psychiatrist. So while I have I have a family of all aunts, believe it or not. I have no uncles. Unless you're married into the family, it's female dominated. So I find that the medical profession was highly pushed. There were nurses aides, registered nurses, nurse practitioners, all over my family, but she was the sort of scholar of her, said group of sisters. And she, went on to leave, Haiti and became a psychiatrist. And, at a very young age, when I thought I wanted to be a doctor at like 7 years old, I quickly, felt like I was like her. I was the older sister. I was the voice of reason. And it was just an example of someone that had come from a different country, didn't have much, and was still managed to not only finish and be an excellent psychiatrist, but also contribute back to Haiti and in other ways. And I saw that at a very young age. So I would say she was probably one of my first inspirations. I do find inspiration in the I shouldn't say small things, in the ordinary things, like in my mother. She worked night shifts while, my sister and I tried to, sort of play adult after 10 p.m. And, I recognized that now I'm becoming a mother and trying to manage all the things, especially being ambitious in my career. I recognize the responsibility that being a parent and providing financially, what that means. So I am impressed and inspired by their rigor, their audacity to not have English as the first language and not know their way or anyone in the country, and still find a way to establish themselves, have daughters in college. Like, that is fundamentally, the things that I believe in. So I found inspiration really in all of them, and in bits and pieces.
Great question. We have another question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Who asked that question? Excellent question. I think, so I did mention that I have an interest in, I'm a beauty enthusiast. I'm a naturalista, if you will. And I think if I could transition into any new industry, it would be beauty and culture would be some sort of element in that experience. So I hope that in combining those two topics, I can somehow transition into a space. It could be, I don't know, being a journalist, being a talk show personality, doing research in development of products for people of color. I find that during my downtime, I don't mind looking into things like that. And so that is definitely an area I'd love to transition into in the next 5 years.
That's a great question. We have another question. Outside of your role in corporate, are there any other endeavors you want to personally pursue?
That being one of them, which is a huge undertaking for me because I feel like I've been labeled as the manufacturing tech person. As a person of color, I find that LinkedIn, they're constantly reaching out to me about about roles I've already had. And so I hope to be a little bit more in a creative space, creative realm, creative editing in the beauty industrial space. Could be health too, nutrition. I'm open to those windows.
Okay, we have another question. Being the only Black female in your position at your company, how do you decompress? It's exhausting sometimes.
That is the truth. How do I decompress? Food is good to me. Food is good to me. I find that sometimes having a conversation with someone that is going through the same thing, even if it's in a different organization, it helps to put things in perspective for me. Um, I enjoy time with family and friends, light time where you can just get dressed and just talk about the things you want to do, vacation. Um, when it's nice out, I like being outside. Um, Podcasts also help me as well, learning about people who have been through those experiences and have found ways to navigate it. Like we're not alone. As alone and very much of an individual I feel in this experience, I know there are others who came before me that have been through, if not more challenging times, extremely challenging times. And so that there's a saying that Gwen Weber, I wish she were here, says is like, I have your hands, my hands are on your back. And so when I know I have the support of, my family, my husband, my sister, there are people who are rooting for me, even when I feel like I'm still trying to figure it out. That energy really gets me energized.
Great question. Another question, have you ever faced any insecurities based, sorry, another one popped up. Have you ever faced any insecurities based on your age, feeling too young regarding your career field? And if so, how have you addressed them?
Yes and yes. Um, it is very easy for someone to say not quite to you, or she's great, but not, she's a young talent. Are people going to believe her? Even if they believe me, they're asking, are other people going to believe her in the room? What I say to that is go to organizations where you see active examples. Like that should be a question in the interview. Are there examples of people who have, what does, in a 3 years time, can we talk about the recent promotions that have been made in this organization? For myself, I find that it does get to me, but I find that so long as I know I'm contributing as an individual worker and someone hears at the end of the day that I am meeting my requirements, I'm meeting and or exceeding the requirements that have been set for me in a role, and I know where the potential opportunities for growth is, even if it's external of the organization, I just keep myself moving in that. It doesn't always happen when I expect it to. Sometimes you're in a role, and I'll be very candid. I was in my role for 4.5 years before the conversation of a promotion was mentioned. The organization was changing and evolving, and they needed to restructure the team. And I had to go through an interview process within my organization. And then even after I interviewed, I questioned if I would get it. But really holding firm and then coming up with a timeline for yourself. If you recognize that after an extended amount of time, I call it 5 years, that you've been in a role in a space and you don't feel like you're learning. You don't feel like your voice is being heard or opportunities of growth are showing themselves, change it. We're in that space where people don't stay. I shouldn't say people don't stay. Many people have the opportunity to not stay in organizations for 30 plus years. So allow yourself to try something new.
I would agree with that. It seems like there's a huge power shift. Like the prospective employee has like the leisure to decide which companies they actually want to work for, what they're going to tolerate. They're actually looking at how the company conducts themselves. Is the company diverse? What are their, social stances and things like that. So it's definitely the environment right now where people can make that transition. So I'll second that for sure. So we have two more questions in the chat. Please talk about the interview process. How did you prepare? How many interviews were there? Any tricky questions?
So there's always questions that one, you have to provide examples of going through a challenging time, going through adversity, and how were you able to meet said goal. And I find that SMART goals, so finding measurable, concise goals is important, especially in corporate organizations. They want people that yield results, right? That are able to help with their bottom line or drive change in the organization. So making sure that you have a list of your skills, so I'm actually doing this again for myself, a skills map. So what is the skill and how were you able to be an active example of driving said skill? What were you able to drive to completion has been huge questions, I find, especially when organizations work on budgeting, to be quite frank, and so there's a plethora of jobs, but I find that corporate organizations are highly focused on budgeting. And so if there are too many overheads, they need to find a way to see who's being efficient and how are they being efficient. So again, SMART goals, always have that in line. Anything that was tricky. For me personally, because when you've interviewed enough for organizations, I find that they ask the same thing. In some strange way, I think that they want to know what skills you have, what is transferable, and what can you bring to the table. Other questions that they might ask, which is not always easy to answer, especially if you're not too fond of the position you're in, is what do you like about the position? So I know Samoya mentioned, if you're struggling with liking your initial position, find something, whether it be a skill, an opportunity that you want to reach to. Don't say nothing, because again, they'll quickly keep you where you are. They don't have a problem keeping you where you are.
Well said. So we have two more questions. Another one just popped up. If you could do anything differently in terms of your career, what would it be?
Find a way to get a full ride. Find a way for college to be paid for. Just from an academic, it's expensive. In whatever route you choose, there are scholarships, there are different programs. Find a way to have it so that you maximize on having college paid for. Coming in as a first generation Haitian American, my parents did not have any financial funds for me ready. So I paid and am still paying for the degrees that I earned. So find a way to finance that in some capacity that alleviates you from, wanting to start things up as you transition into being an adult. In terms of my career, I would say apply to the job, even if all the skills that are listed are not things that you've dabbled in before. If you cover 75% of what the skills are, go for it. Because I find that a lot of the learning comes in the job. They'll use complex language, leverage your relationships, find a sponsor, and give yourself some definition on where you want to go. I think I wish I had done that a little bit earlier. Those are some things I probably would have done differently when I started, working out of college.
Okay, one more question from Nicole. Any tips for someone in tech, more of a digital service, to further their education or experience in the technical field?
Of Digital services. There are a lot of certifications and trainings that are free. I think now more than ever, there's a lot of knowledge and education that is available. You don't always have to pay and register for a program to know how to do something. Coursera is just an example that I could think of where there's a lot of free material out there where you're able to build on your skills while you're sitting in a position. Don't be afraid to ask. It doesn't have to be a degree for you to really be an expert enough to apply or transition into, in much case, it sounds like digital services. So, some people are willing to teach you per diem. There's a lot of students who want to, who are in internships, find different internships, find ways to network so that you increase your exposure in the topics or subjects or industry you're looking to transition into.
So lastly, I just wanted to say thank you, Cassandra. This was amazing. You said so much great information, so many tips. So truly appreciate you for, partaking in the Tech and Culture Speaker Series. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who came out and asked these amazing questions and made this event the event it was essentially. So thank you so much. If you, want to visit the Center State CEO website and find any other events, you can, visit the website that you registered here. We have COVID-19 resources. You can follow us on social media at Center State CEO. You can also follow Cassandra. Her at Instagram is right there. And then lastly, if you have questions on how to further engage with tech and culture Generation Next, you can reach out to us at generationnext@centerstateceo.com. So again, thank you everyone for participating in the speaker series, and we'll see you next time.